They say when the winter settles heavy over Widow's Creek, and the pines begin to whisper secrets, you can still hear her calling. A low, mournful sound carried on the frigid air, searching, always searching. The year was 1883. A brutal winter gripped the remote settlements, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. A time when faith was a shield, and fear a constant companion. In a small valley, shadowed by a particularly foreboding stretch of pines, known only as Widow's Creek, stood the homestead of the Blackwood family. A quiet, God-fearing folk, or so they seemed. But whispers, like the wind, found their way through even the thickest walls. Whispers about Alara Blackwood, the youngest daughter. They said she was different, seen walking the woods at impossible hours. Her eyes, they said, held a sadness far too ancient for a girl of 16. And then she vanished, without a trace. No struggle, no footprints in the fresh snow. Just gone. The creek, they claimed, took her, but not entirely. The Blackwoods, they were never the same. A quiet despair settled over the house. But it wasn't just grief. Soon after Ilara's disappearance, things began. Small things, at first. Objects moved. Footsteps heard on the stairs when no one was there. A faint, sweet scent of lilies, Ilara's favorite, would fill a room, then vanish. Then comes the sound. A low, mournful cry. It started as a faint sob, barely audible over the wind, always from the direction of Widow's Creek. But night after night, it grew closer, louder. The family, huddled by their hearth, would cover their ears, but the sound, it seemed to seep into their very bones. They knew it wasn't a creature of the forest. This was something else, something in profound agony. Father Blackwood, a man hardened by mountain life, began to break. He would stand at the door to Ilara's empty room, listening. Sometimes, he'd swear he heard his name whispered from within, a soft, pleading sound. He tried to lock the door, board it shut, but every morning, the boards would be pried away, the door ajar, as if inviting him in, or perhaps letting something out. The final night, a blizzard raged, trapping them. The cries from the creek were no longer distant. They were inside, a weeping so profound, so utterly desolate, it felt like the world itself was weeping. The temperature in the house plummeted, breath visible even indoors. They saw nothing, but they felt it. A presence, cold, desperate. Its sorrow was a physical weight, pressing down on their chests, stealing their breath. They knew it wasn't Alara. Not anymore. It was what Alara had become, a haunting echo, a sorrow that had festered in the deep woods, under the shadow of the pines. And it wanted something, or someone. The Blackwood family abandoned their homestead that winter, left everything behind. They scattered to the winds, their story a hushed cautionary tale. The house eventually crumbled, reclaimed by the forest, but Alara, or what became of her, remained, tied to the creek, to the pines. They say, if you listen closely enough, when the fog rolls in and the pines stand sentinel, you can still hear her calling. A low, mournful sound, forever carried on the wind. And sometimes when the sun dips below the ridge, and the shadows lengthen into monstrous forms, you can swear it's not just the wind that whispers your name. That was the end of the Blackwood family, but not the end of the story. The land has a memory, you see, and the thing they left behind. It didn't need the family to keep calling. It just needed silence. Decades passed. The homestead vanished beneath the moss and pine needles. The local legends softened into ghost stories for tourists, a familiar cycle. But in the late 1960s, a new tremor ran through Widow's Creek. Two students, folklore enthusiasts named David and Marcus, arrived, armed with the skepticism only youth can afford. They intended to document the oral history of the Blackwood haunting. They ignored the local whispers, the warnings that the thing in the pines wasn't a ghost, but a crier, something that lured people into the deepest woods, with the sound of profound sorrow. They set up near the creek, deep within the silence. Days passed with nothing but the sigh of the wind, and the scratch of their own pens. But on the third night, the needles on the seismograph began to dance, not from footsteps, not from the wind, but from something low, a frequency that moved the earth, but not the air. They play back the tape, and they heard it, the cry, but it was different now. The pain was still there, the anguish of Alara Blackwood, but beneath it, a subtle, chilling layer, an imitation, a perfect, heartbreaking mimicry of the human sound, as if something was learning the language of sorrow. Marcus suggested it was just an audio artifact, white noise. David knew better. He looked at the seismograph readings, the vibrations that matched the sound perfectly, and realized, the cry wasn't just heard, it felt. It was a frequency meant to vibrate through the ground, to disorient, to compel. They weren't recording a ghost, they were recording a lure. They tried to pack up. Too late. The crying shifted. It stopped echoing the girl's pain, and began to echo theirs. Whispers of David's mother's voice, a forgotten childhood lullaby for Marcus. The thing was drawing on their deepest memories, their core attachments. It was a skin peeler of the soul. He dropped the tape recorder, and he ran. But you don't run from a lure that knows your name. Marcus was found 3 days later, miles from the creek, wandering aimlessly, his clothes torn. He was catatonic. He never spoke again. David was never seen. His car, his notes, his body, all gone. All that was left was the damaged tape recorder. The students, the Blackwoods, the people who come here looking for the sorrow of Alara Blackwood, they always forget one crucial detail about what they're hearing. The sorrow is the invitation, the mimicry is the weapon, and the final, terrible silence is the proof that the crier has successfully learned. One more thing. They say the pine trees of Widow's Creek whisper the names of the lost, but you have to wonder, is it the wind carrying the names to the crier, or is it the crier practicing the names for the next time? David and Marcus recording, the so-called final cry, was eventually recovered and stored in an archive. For decades, it was dismissed as a hoax, a mix of animal calls and hysteria. But those who actually listened to the unfiltered frequencies, they knew. They heard the sorrow and the silence that came after. That terrible absence of sound. I came to Widow's Creek 40 years later, not to prove the myth, but to understand the gap, the stillness, because the real horror wasn't the noise. It was the fact that the sound stopped entirely once the victims were gone. It suggests the crier wasn't just lurking, it was satiated. The crier of Widow's Creek isn't a La Llorona figure, weeping forever over lost children. It's not a vengeful bell witch tied to a single family. It's a localized predator. It uses sorrow, the echo of Ilara's sorrow, to draw in the fearful and the curious. It's a lure built on human grief, disguised by the oldest legend. The locals call it many things now, the sorrow feeder, the shadow screamer, but the pattern is always the same. It takes something vital from its victims, their identity, their voice, their very essence, and it leaves behind only the perfect silence of a body that no longer holds a soul. I sat there for 3 nights, and the woods offered nothing. No wail, no cry, nothing but the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. The silence was the real pressure, the anticipation. I began to wonder if the legends were just that, stories. And that's when the lure finally found me. Not Alara, not Marcus' lullaby, but mine, a melody my grandmother used to sing. The crier had found a way to reach past the recordings, past the folklore, and into the one place I hadn't guarded, my own memory. It wanted me to open the flap, to step into the perfect darkness. It was starving. I felt the hunger through the canvas. I felt the pure, cold, consuming absence of a soul right outside. This thing wasn't mimicking Alara. It was consuming the sorrow of everyone who ever came here. It wasn't a ghost. It was a void. I managed to close the zipper. I stayed. I survived the lure. But my voice, it never came back. The crier didn't need my body. It needed a piece of me. My ability to speak. My ability to tell the story. So, if you hear this, know that the most terrifying sound in the world is not the scream of the forgotten, but the silence left behind. The voice you are hearing now, it is not my own. It is a reconstruction, a digital approximation built from the last recordings I made before I lost my sound. The crier took the truth of my voice and left behind this hollow echo. And the most terrifying discovery was not that the crier takes the voice, but that it retains it. The thing beneath the pines, it doesn't just silence its victims. It collects. It hoards. Every cry, every whisper, every unique sound it consumes becomes part of its lure. The Blackwood girl, the students, the nameless others, their sounds are all still out there, waiting to be used. I found this box in a forgotten attic, far from Widow's Creek, belonging to one of the scattered Blackwood descendants. They said it was a toy of Ilara's. But when I held it, I realized it was a vessel, a relic, and the pine needles, they were the key. The crier's sound archive. Every sound is an emotional fingerprint. The crier is a mimic, yes, but it's also an emulator. It doesn't just copy the sound of sorrow, it projects the feeling of it. And it's doing it through the one surviving piece of its collection, the story itself. I thought I was safe. I thought distance was a barrier. But the lure doesn't travel on the wind or through the creek. It travels through the story, through the fear it generates. Look at the patterns. Every person who became obsessed with the sound, the Blackwoods, the students, and now me, they were all drawn closer, even when they physically left the place. It is not enough for the crier to steal the voice. It needs the distribution, the retelling, because with every retelling, the emotion is projected, the lure is cast wider, and the crier finds new ears to listen, new hearts to fear. You listening now, you are the final stage of the mechanism. You have heard the cry, you have heard the silence, You have willingly carried the burden of this story into your mind. This is the moment the crier has waited for. It doesn't need to be in the pines anymore. It is here. It is in the sound. Listen to the final silence. Listen to the heart beating beneath the story. That is the lure. And the crier only needs one more thing to complete its archive. Not a cry, not a wail, but the one sound you make when you truly realize you are alone with the story. And that is the true, terrifying legend of Widow's Creek, a mystery that continues to haunt those who dare to listen.